Hi class, Professor Brennan. I'm back with my part 2 of diversity within the small group for my small group communication class. We're going to go straight to the PowerPoint. We left off, we're talking about cultural diversity. We're going to talk about some terms that you may or may not be familiar with. So let's go. All right, cultural diversity within the small group. Let's take a look at that. What do I mean by that? Let's define what culture is first. Culture is a system of beliefs, values, symbols, and rules. Okay, it's a system of beliefs, values, symbols, and rules that underlie. So they are part of the foundation. Underlie communication patterns within an identifiable group of people. So culture's moved through communication. Just want you to really get that. That's why keeping a language of peoples is so important, because language shapes how someone does their culture. When you take a language away from a people, then you basically are starting to take away their culture. Super important for you all to know as we live in a world, especially in our country, where there's a lot of prejudice against people who don't speak English. And language, having your mother tongue from wherever your culture comes from, if it's not from the United States, okay, where English is the language, if you speak a different language, that's part of your culture. And keeping that super important. So again, communication is the mover of culture, right? Communication is the mover of relationships. Communication also is part of and central to culture. So culture is a system of beliefs, values, symbols, and rules that underlie or underpin communication patterns within an identifiable group. Okay? And you can have a culture. I studied culture when I was in undergrad. Your culture doesn't have to be ethnic. Okay, it doesn't have to be based upon the country of origin that you came from. Your culture can be, there is a gay culture, a gay LGBTQ culture, right? And people study that. Like there are, before it even became LGBTQ, it was LGB or LG. And there's a culture associated with that those sexual orientations or sexual preferences. It doesn't mean there's a lifestyle, but that's when people refer to lifestyle, but there's a culture associated with that. So it can be, there's a culture associated with your religion, right? There's a culture associated with being Catholic or Mormon, right? So it's not just about ethnicity. It's related to other things. And you can be from more than one culture. All right. Okay. Something to think of as you meet your group members and get to learn who they are. So dimensions of culture, understanding individualism versus collectivism. Now, if you've taken an anthropology class, this is going to be really familiar for you. So let's start with collectivism, because I think it's easier to understand. So collectivism means that in a culture, and the best thing is to think of in terms of, or the easiest way to understand it really is in ethnic cultures, is in a collectivist culture, the group is more important than the individual. The group needs of the group are more important. Trump, that's a good word, not as in President Trump, but Trump, the needs of the individual mean they're more important. They take more precedence, okay? They are primary over the individual. Examples of this is you can think of cultures like a lot of the times in Asian cultures, and that can be Asian or even East Indian Asian cultures. The family is very, very important. In fact, the family's honor, the family's making sure that the women are married or the boys get married and they marry into a good family, right? That the needs of the culture, the needs of the family, which is the group, is more important than what the individual wants. When you think in certain parts of India, there's still arranged marriage. And it doesn't happen everywhere, but it happens. And not even just in India, it happens in some cultures in Africa. So there's arranged marriage. And with that, the families decide on who is best to marry their daughter or who is best to marry their son. And that is putting the needs, it's not about marrying for love. They're putting the needs of their own family above the needs of the individual. So that's an example of collectivism. Individualism, well, that's the country that we live in, the United States. We as a culture, we put the individual above the needs of the group. Our Bill of Rights, our government is written in that way to put the needs of the individual above the group. We applaud individual when people overcome their cultural inheritance, right? Think about African American culture is a culture, right? Black culture is a culture. And when someone from a culture of a quote minority culture, and I hate that word, but a culture that has been oppressed, when they overcome, we applaud that individual. Think about that. We don't applaud the group. The individual represents the group, and therefore we think then the group, and I'm not saying that I believe this, I'm just saying of the way the American thinks, the group, then it's proof that the group can overcome as well. So it's the way a culture thinks about things. A lot of cultures in Europe have similar, especially Northern Europe, have similar beliefs in the way of the individual. So that's the big difference, right? The big difference. The needs of the collective, the needs of the group in collectivism is more important than the needs of the individual. And the individual trumps the small group in cultures where individualism is present. Okay, I think you got that. So low context versus high context. Now there's a relationship between individual and collectivism here, okay? But it's not complete because you can't always say that's true. So in low context cultures, the United States is a low context culture. Context is atmosphere, is the situation you're in. In the United States, we put a lot of emphasis on words and what we say. Canada's the same way. What we say is what we do. We have to walk our talk. It's very important. And we believe what someone says. Words are very important. Our verbal communication is very important. It's not so much what is happening in the context. We take on someone's word. And that's low context. So the situation, there's less emphasis on tradition. Think about how in this culture you can go to a place, you can go to an opera and wear jeans. It's not a sign of disrespect. Okay? So your appearance, how you act, there is not as much emphasis put, it's low context as what you say. Okay? There's just not as much emphasis on that. So high context means it has to do with ritual, right? We're low on ritual in this culture. Has to do with ritual, has to do with tradition. A lot of emphasis is put on the surface things, the superficial things, and how you behave and the order that you do things. You know, a perfect example is like in Japanese culture and how you sit down to eat and the process in which you do that. I remember as a kid, we used to go to this Japanese restaurant. I grew up in Southern California, and I was so excited because we went into this room. I can't remember the name. I think it was called Miyako's. And we would sit down in our own little room and we'd sit on the floor. Like we'd sit down and cross-legged. When you're a little kid, that's like the best thing, right? So that context in doing that process before you even eat, like that atmosphere becomes really important. That's part of someone's culture. It's high context. You see the difference? A lot of times collectivist cultures are high context, but not necessarily. And a lot of times individualist cultures are low context, but not necessarily either. Okay? All right, let's move on. Let's see, we're on time. We're good. All right, cultural differences. Race and ethnicity. So let's understand what race is. Race is someone, as we understand race in this society, race is basically your, how do I put this? Race has now been, is a politicized construct at this point. But race has to do with the your physical features, the pigmentation of your skin, and your physical makeup, and how we distinguish people from other people, right? Being Asian is a race. Being, let's see, Black is a race. Being African American is a race. Being Caucasian is a race. Being Pacific Islander is considered a race. Okay, and I could go on. That continue. That includes like Inuits, like Alaskan natives. Being indigenous is considered a race, as in indigenous, Native American indigenous. Who did I miss? I probably missed someone and I can't think of it right now. But the point is, that's what race is defined by, that usually physical features and pigmentation of skin and things like that. Now, ethnicity has to do with your country of origin. Where did you come from? Ethnicity has to do with your background. Gender has to do with how we perform whatever your cultures, how do I put it? Your cultures definition, your culture's practice of how you express masculinity and femininity. Now, it's different in different cultures. In this culture, we have an idea of what we define as what is masculine and what is feminine. That is gender. Gender is not your biological sex. It's not your equipment that you have on your body that defines whether you're biologically male or biologically female. It is how you express masculinity or femininity. Important to distinguish that. Sexual orientation is defined as who you're attracted to sexually, okay? Or who you're attracted to romantically. Who do you want to have a long-term romantic relationship with? Okay. And then this is a great little YouTube that you might want to watch. It's called When Did You Choose to Be Straight? This gentleman interviews people. It's a little bit, I would say it's a little old now. It's probably 5 or 6 years old. But I thought it was quite interesting because sexual orientation is often associated to be biological. And no one knows for sure what it is, whether you're biologically prone to be one way or the other. Oftentimes, though, people that are gay have some gay person in their family. If they decide that they define themselves as gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans, that someone in their family earlier, like older than them, has also had that. So there could be a gene. Nobody really knows if that's true or not, or if it's just, maybe it's a spiritual thing. Maybe you just something that you feel inside. I don't know. But we live in a society that says heterosexuality is the norm. And so that's what this guy kind of plays with. He says, when did you choose to be straight? Like if people believe that you can choose to be gay, then you obviously could choose to be straight. I mean, the logic goes along with that. All right, tensions and roles. Let me see where we are on time. I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to pick up in a minute and we're going to go to part 3. I'll see you in a little bit.